If you decided to start learning Italian, but your first language is, say, Spanish or French, then you won't have a problem understanding the very concept of feminine and masculine nouns. But what if your first language doesn't have such a feature? How can you understand it? Let me see if I can help. Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today I want to talk about feminine and masculine within Italian and also all languages that use this feature. The way oftentimes this rule is taught, the idea that if a noun finishes with an A, usually it's feminine, and if a noun finishes with an O, usually it's masculine, two examples being la pizza and il tavolo. This is often taught as a grammatical rule, as something you just need to memorize that just has a grammatical function. But as someone who speaks Italian as a first language, there is more to feminine and masculine within nouns. And hopefully with this video I'll be able to explore this for you. And by the end of this video you'll be able to also perceive this little bit of a je ne sais quoi. Masculine and feminine. What does it mean? How can you imagine it? Is it a big mistake? Where does it reside? Okay, let's begin with these. Every noun in Italian is either masculine or feminine. There are languages, such as German, that also have a neutral, but that does not appear in Italian. It's either masculine or feminine. When it comes to verbs, only verbs that are connected to motion conjugate according to feminine or masculine rule. Let me give you an example. If I say, I ate an apple, ho mangiato una mela. Whether I be a man or a woman, the past tense of to eat remains mangiato. But if I wanted to translate the sentence, I went to the supermarket, as a man I would say sono andato al supermercato. As a woman I would say sono andata al supermercato. So you conjugate verbs, depending on masculine or feminine, only with motion verbs. So what's a good way to imagine what it means when we say that a box in Italian is feminine? Well, actually a good way to imagine it is that if you could animate this object, most likely I would imagine it as a girl. A phone, however, il telefono, is masculine, so imagine it as a boy. This might sound odd because you might think, well, yeah, but a box is not an animate object, therefore why should I imagine it as a woman? Well, in English you very occasionally do it too. It's the same thing when you give a name to a ship, or you refer to a ship as a her. And if you've ever done that with your car, you try to imagine or talk about it, but sometimes you say her. Well, that's what we do in Italian with the entirety of the language. As a little piece of trivia, the masculine version of this also exists, and it's scatolo. So you can have a scatola, you can have a scatolo. You cannot, however, have a telefona. No. Phones are only boys. So, is it a big mistake in the ears of a native speaker if you use the wrong article, for example, or if you use the wrong conjugation and you use masculine when you're supposed to use feminine and vice versa? Well, it won't impede communication, so in the spectrum of levels of severity of mistakes, I can still understand you even if you say sono andato al supermercato, but you're a woman. The only thing is that as an Italian, most likely I will still correct you, just because it is grammatically incorrect. Also, if instead of saying la pizza, you said il pizza, I would definitely correct you, although I would still understand. So, is it a tremendous mistake? No, but you'll notice the natives will just correct you because it's just wrong. Now, if you've studied Italian even a little bit, you've probably been told that singular masculine nouns tend to end with an O, occasionally an E, Italian e, and then you had been told that, generally speaking, feminine singular nouns end with a A. So, when you hear pasta, you can already connect the article la pasta, because you know it's feminine. On a similar note, if you hear for the first time the word in Italian for knife, which is coltello, okay, masculine, so let's use il coltello. Now, there are of course exceptions to this rule, and these exceptions usually drive foreigners nuts. Sorry about that, but there is something we can learn from these exceptions, and it makes it fascinating, and this is something that perhaps you had never heard of before. Let's look at one of the most common exceptions, this word. This is mano. It ends with an O, so you imagine it must be masculine, and you say il mano, and you're wrong. This is one of those exceptions whereby, even though we have a final O, the article is still la mano. So here is the kicker. The O at the end would suggest that it's masculine. The article at the beginning, la, would suggest that it's feminine. So which one is it? Which has the priority. Now, what might be surprising is that the article has the priority. So, if you were to ask me, is la mano feminine or masculine? I would say absolutely feminine, la mano. What this teaches us is that in reality, masculinity or femininity of a noun does not reside on the final vowel like often people are told. It resides in the article. The article has priority and trumps all. So another way to look at it is that the final vowel is just a common result of the article, that usually when you have la, the final vowel of the noun will be a, and when you have il, usually the consequence of that article will be a o. But when there is an exception, the article still maintains the gender of the word. So la mano is feminine. Another interesting piece of information, though, is that sometimes there is change, and this change is usually accompanied with a new meaning. For instance, il tavolo is a masculine singular noun and it means the table. But if you turn it into female, la tavola not only means still table, but now it means the table you use when you have lunch or dinner. So, il tavolo, generic for tables, la tavola, specific for dinner or lunch table. So what's the best way to remember all of this? Well, as a native, I've never really studied, or we native speakers, we don't like sit down and memorize a million patterns or try to repeat words and say il tavolo, i tavoli, la scatola, le scatole. We never do this, and yet we learn it perfectly, which kind of tells us that this technique is not only boring, but most likely isn't that effective after all. So how do we learn it? Well, in this case, very much is created in pattern recognition, which is a result of constant listening and immersion. So if you want to learn feminine and masculine and how to conjugate them in plural and singular form, including the exception, the best way to do it is to do a lot of listening and try to connect experiences to those listening. So rather than just watching a movie, which can still be nice, so rather than just listening to a lot of Italian radio and just hoping to remember stuff, maybe try to create something that can be connected as an experience in your memory in relation then to this sort of vocabulary learning. So this is a ring. By the way, the rings I make, link in the description, I suppose. So ring in Italian is anello. This is the first time you hear it. Now, normally you would say il anello, but when a word begins with a vowel, we tend to remove the I at the beginning and say just l'anello because it's easier to say. If rings or jewelry in general are something you really like, and perhaps you also like silver, gold, bronze, why don't you just try and make a connection in order to commit it to memory? Go get one of your rings or the rings belonging to your mum and tell her, even if she doesn't speak Italian or is not interested, tell your mum, tell your friend, tell your father, hey, you know, ring in Italian is a really cool word. You want to know what it sounds like? It's anello with the article, l'anello, the ring, and it's masculine. So plural would be gli anelli. Believe it or not, telling people, or other words known as teaching people, is in fact the best way to learn. Because you're creating not only a specific memory that will be easier to access for you as you try to remember these words, but the memory will be shared with someone else, which creates a much stronger bond. Alright, noble ones, but if you still want to have like a page or some explanation or perhaps some exercises when it comes to the actual memory-related patterns, when it comes to masculine and feminine, or if you want more lists of exceptions so that perhaps because I'm telling you, you might commit them to memory more easily, let me know, as usual, in the comments below. And if you have any other question, I'm here for you. Thank you very much for joining Metatrons Academy.